The next item of business is Stage 3 proceedings on the UEFA European Championship Scotland Bill. In dealing with the amendments, members should have in front of them the bill as amended at Stage 2, that is SP Bill 54A. They should have the marshalled list and the groupings of amendments. The division bell will sound and proceedings will be suspended for 5 minutes for the first division of the afternoon, and the period of voting for that division will be 30 seconds. Thereafter, I will allow a voting period of 1 minute for the first division after a debate. Could I ask members to please settle down? Thank you. Members who wish to speak in the debate on any group of amendments should press the request to speak buttons as soon as possible after I call the group, and members should now refer to the marshalled list of amendments. And we're at Group 1, Enforcement Provision, Use of Reasonable Force, and I call Amendment 1 in the name of the Minister, which is in a group in its own. Minister, to move and speak to Amendment 1. Mr Macpherson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Amendment 1 makes a change to Section 20, subsection 2 that I believe would be beneficial as a result of changes to Section 20, subsection 1 on the use of reasonable force that were made at Stage 2. The Stage 2 amendments resulted from constructive discussions I had with Ross Greer about the important role of the police constable where the use of reasonable force is being considered. These amendments were agreed unanimously and provided that only a constable can authorise the use of force. Since we have reframed the original power at Stage 2, we need to now reframe the limit on the power. Amendment 1 makes it clear that in exercising that power of authorisation, the police must not authorise an enforcement officer or third-party assister to use force against an individual. Therefore, an enforcement officer or third party who did use force against an individual would be acting unlawfully. This was the case as originally drafted, with the amendment simply ensuring that the manner in which the restriction is imposed is consistent with the way the power is granted. And therefore, I ask members to support this amendment, and I move Amendment 1.
I have no request to speak in this amendment. I am obliged to ask the Minister if he'd like to wind up.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I just ask all members to support this amendment, which will improve the consistency of the approach in Section 20 and ensure that the police constable is central to the authorisation of force.
The question is that Amendment 1 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Amendment 1 is therefore agreed. Now call Amendment 2 in the name of the Minister. It's in Group 2 and it's grouped with Amendment 5. The Minister, please, to move Amendment 2 and speak to both amendments in the group. Mr Macpherson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This group contains government amendments related to commencement of the regulation-making powers in the bill. Amendment 5 extends the sections of the bill that it will be possible to commence through commencement regulations to include the sections required to permit regulations to be laid on the extent and dates of operations of the event zones, trading and advertising, compensation for enforcement action, and on further enforcement processes. The bill already provides for the sections required to allow the ticket touting regulations to be made to be commenced through commencement regulations. And in lodging this amendment today, my aim is to give those we expect to be affected by the regulations certainty as soon as possible so that they have time to understand these and to prepare where required. I want to lay regulations towards the end of January next year, 2020, subject to the date of royal assent and subject to parliamentary approval of this amendment. This would mean that the regulations could be enforced towards the end of March 2020. Under the bill's current provisions, the regulations are unlikely to be enforced much before the end of May 2020, with the championship period beginning on the 1st of June. The trading and advertising offences can, of course, only be committed on the effective date, which will be specified in the regulations, which must be between the 1st of June and the 12th of July. So this amendment today does not change that. It simply provides for the regulations to deliver this, to be confirmed further in advance of the championship period beginning, providing greater notice to those affected to allow them to understand these and to prepare. I think that waiting 2 months after royal assent, as provided for in the bill at present, would be counterproductive, as it would create a period where the content of the Act is confirmed, but where businesses and others with an interest are not clear on the extent of the offences. This is particularly important for the trading and advertising offences, where exemptions to the offences will be set out in regulations, as will the maps of the event zones and the dates these are in operation. I shared illustrative regulations with Parliament on the 17th of October to show how the Scottish Government expects to use its powers. The Scottish Government has been working to refine the illustrative regulations since October, and that has included seeking feedback from key stakeholders. We have already incorporated some of the feedback from the lead committee, for example, to make an exception to the street trading offence to allow busking. There is also a requirement in the bill for Glasgow City Council to publish guidance on advertising and trading restrictions. In addition, the Council will need time to process authorisations to trade or advertise in the event zones. These authorisations will, for example, permit charity collections. Neither of these things can happen until the regulations are in force. Being able to lay the regulations sooner after royal assent, as this amendment proposes, will mean that there is more time for the Council to undertake this activity and respond to any queries it receives. I now turn to the other amendment in this group. Amendment 2 provides that the commencement regulations to be made under Section 34, subsection 1A, as modified by Amendment 5, are not subject to Section 31. Section 31 sets out whether the negative or affirmative procedure should be followed when making regulations under the bill, and also provides that regulations under the bill may include ancillary provision. These two aspects are not required for commencement regulations because they will be subject to no procedure aside from being laid in Parliament, as is standard practice for commencement regulations, and because there is no need for the ancillary powers in relation to commencing this bill. I therefore ask members to support Amendments 2 and 5, and I move Amendment 2.
I have no request to speak. Would you like to wind up, please, Minister?
I urge all members to support these amendments so that businesses, charities and the public as a whole can have certainty about the restrictions and enforcement processes that will be in place during the championship period in good time before that period begins on the 1st of June. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
The question is that Amendment 2 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Amendment 2 is agreed. That concludes Group 2. And we move on to Group 3, names of bodies. And I call Amendment 3 in the name of the Minister, and that's grouped with Amendments 4 and 6. Minister to move Amendment 3 and speak to all amendments in the group. Please, Mr Macpherson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This group contains government amendments making minor and technical changes to the bill. Amendments 3 and 4 replace the references in the bill to Police Scotland with its proper statutory name, the Police Service of Scotland. Police Scotland is only that body's common name rather than its formal legal name as set out in the Police and Fire Reform Scotland Act 2012. Amendment 6 adds European before championship in the long title of the bill, ensuring clarity and consistency with the rest of the bill, specifically with Section 1 and the short title. I move Amendment 3.
I have no request to speak. Minister, would you like to support your own amendment?
Just urge Parliament to support the amendments in this group. Thank you.
The question is that Amendment 3 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Amendment 3 is therefore agreed. And we now move on to Amendments 4, 5 and 6, which are all in the name of the Minister and previously debated. Can I ask the Minister to please move Amendments 4 to 6 en bloc?
Formally moved. En bloc.
Can I ask whether any member objects to a single question being put on Amendments 4 to 6? Okay. The question is that Amendments 4 to 6 are agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Amendments 4, 5 and 6 are agreed. And that ends consideration of amendments. Now, don't get too excited. You're not finished yet. As members will be aware, at this point in the proceedings, the presiding officer is required under standing orders to decide whether or not, in his view, any provision of the bill relates to a protected subject matter. That is, whether it modifies the electoral system and franchise for Scottish parliamentary elections. In the case of this bill, in the presiding officer's view, no provision of the UEFA European Championship Scotland Bill relates to a protected subject matter. Therefore, the bill does not require a supermajority to be passed at stage 3. And the next item of business is stage 3 debate on motion 20221 in the name of Ben Macpherson on the UEFA European Championship Scotland Bill. May I ask those who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Ben Macpherson to open the debate for 7 minutes, please, Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's a great pleasure that I'm able to address the Chamber this afternoon at this key milestone for the UEFA European Championship Scotland Bill. And first of all, I'd like to pay my thanks to my officials and all the clerks of the committee members, and indeed all members who have engaged with this piece of legislation. I think we have collaborated well, and it has shown this Parliament at its best of parties coming together to make legislation stronger and more effective. For the first time ever, in the middle of next year, 12 cities across Europe will host matches as part of the 60th anniversary of the Championship, with Glasgow joining the likes of Rome, Munich, Amsterdam and London. It is the third biggest sporting event in the world and will further enhance Glasgow and Scotland's reputation as the perfect stage for major events when Hampden Park holds 4 matches in the summer of 2020. The Hampden Roar will no doubt be in force, and we hope to see some future iconic moments in the famous stadium. Who can forget Zinedine Zidane's stunning goal in the 2002 Champions League final? Or, for a different generation, the amazing spectacle that was the 10-goal thriller European Cup final of 1960. The European Championship itself has provided many incredible moments over the years, with a personal favourite of mine being Ali McCoist's winning goal for Scotland against Switzerland at Euro 96 when I was in S2. It's moments like these that live long in the memory, and Euro 2020 promises to bring supporters more memorable occasions we can relive time and time again. We already know 2 of the countries who will play at Hampden: Croatia, the World Cup finalists, and the Czech Republic. The supporters of Croatia and their striking red checkered tops and the Czech Republic will bring colour and noise with them, and we sincerely hope Scotland can join the party following the playoffs in March this year. And we look forward to welcoming all those fans to Glasgow and to Scotland as a whole, as an outward-looking European nation. Having seen our women's national team reach the World Cup finals earlier this year, it would be fantastic to watch the men follow suit by qualifying again for a major championship. Regardless, we look forward to welcoming Europe to our shores next summer and showcasing Scotland as the outward-looking, progressive and diverse country we are. The benefits of bringing Euro 2020 to Scotland will be significant, not just for our economy, but for our international reputation too. And hosting international events often involves meeting certain requirements of the rights holder, and the bill that we have been considering seeks to ensure the successful delivery of Euro 2020 in line with the requirements of UEFA for all 12 host cities. The legislation will protect commercial rights in relation to ticket touting, street trading and advertising, and also contains measures in relation to the enforcement of those commercial protections. As I've said, I would like to thank the Culture, Tourism, Europe and External Affairs Committee for the constructive nature in which the bill has been considered throughout the Stage 1 evidence sessions and at Stage 2. We have based the provisions for the bill on the Glasgow Commonwealth Games Act 2008, while also responding to UEFA's specific requirements. The bill provides for 3 event zones in Glasgow where the street trading and advertising restrictions will apply: Hampden Park, George Square and the Merchant City. The Scottish Government has been engaging with those with an interest to ensure that they can benefit from the opportunity the event presents, and will continue to look for opportunities to raise awareness about the restrictions that will be in place. The committee has heard from a range of stakeholders, and I'd also like to thank those organisations again for contributing to this process. The proposals on ticket touting have been broadly supported, and we are determined to support fair access to tickets so that as many fans as possible can enjoy the matches. And to that end, the bill will make ticket touting for championship matches a criminal offence. The scrutiny provided by members has been beneficial in refining and clarifying the bill provisions. 35 amendments were lodged at stage 2. 28 of these were Scottish Government amendments, which sought to respond to the recommendations in the committee's stage 1 report, in particular relating to the enforcement provisions in the bill. I am confident that, working together, we have improved this bill through amendments at stage 2 and now at stage 3 too. Presiding Officer, from the stage 1 debate and one-to-one meetings I have had, I know that members recognise the significant benefits of Glasgow and Scotland hosting Euro 2020. The Scottish Government and our partners for the event are delighted to be involved in the Euro for Europe, and this bill will help to ensure successful delivery of the event. And for that reason, I urge members across the Chamber to support this bill this afternoon, and I move that the Parliament agrees that the UEFA European Championship Scotland Bill be passed. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Rachel Hamilton for up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'd like to also thank the Culture, Tourism, Europe and External Affairs Committee and the clerks for all of their hard work. We've talked very much about how much the UEFA European Championships bill will enable a fantastic sporting event to come to Scotland to celebrate the tournament's 60th birthday, with 12 cities across Europe chosen to host the Euro 2020 Championships. And I am absolutely delighted and speak on behalf of these benches today that Glasgow was selected. And Glasgow will be able to take advantage of the opportunities that come from visitors and fans coming to Glasgow and the surrounding area, bringing in so much more tourism and contributing very much to the local economy. And as we reach the final stage of the bill, it's important to remember it will address areas of Scots law which does not meet UEFA's standards of protecting sponsors' commercial interests. We will be supporting the final stage of the bill to ensure the Euro 2020 Championships can take place next year. But before we do, I will take this opportunity to quickly provide a brief recap on the various stages. At stage 1, whilst on these benches we supported the bill in principle, it became clear that there were initial concerns, especially around enforcement officers and their powers. And we felt their powers were too broad and not clear enough. Amendments were welcomed that provided further clarification on their powers and stated that where the use of reasonable force takes place, a police constable must always be present. I did express my concerns around the event zones, the implications on local people and their businesses. Mount Florida Community Council, Police Scotland and others offered their suggestions as to how the bill could be strengthened to ensure that the businesses and local community around Hampden are comfortable with the new legislation and the implications it will bring for them. And I'm grateful that the Minister took these concerns on board and that the amendments were lodged at stage 2 in order to address this. At stage 2, the major issue of ticket touting was addressed, and ticket touting remains a large problem when it comes to major sporting events. At stage 1, I spoke about ticket touting and how it should not spoil the experience of those attending the UEFA matches, and thankfully, again, amendments sought to address these. Scots law already has some restrictions around ticket touting, but these relate only to causing a public annoyance to the person being approached to purchase the ticket. I was glad to see the Association of Tartan Army Clubs, Supporters Direct Scotland and the Scottish Football Supporters Association writing to the Culture, Tourism, Europe and External Affairs Committee in October to express their wishes for better ticket touting measures. As the measures were not sufficient to UEFA's requirements, it was necessary to make provisions in the bill for this. At stage 2, Mike Rumbles lodged amendments on ways of approaching the issue of ticket touting, and his amendment looked at making sure UEFA was not exempt from ticket touting. The amendment did not mention UEFA specifically. Instead, it was a broad amendment, meaning it covered all bases. Although it was defeated, it was encouraging that similar amendments from Ben McPherson and the Minister were passed in order to strengthen the bill and tackle this issue. And I do believe there does need to be a broader discussion in Scotland as to how we tackle ticket touting moving forward so that fans are not negatively impacted by this in the future. But that's another conversation for another day. With regard to enforcement officers, during stage 1, the Scottish Conservatives raised concerns about the details in the bill regarding enforcement officers. And we felt that the bill did not sufficiently outline how regulations would set out criteria for selecting appropriate persons to become enforcement officers. And at stage 2, amendments passed which ensure that local authorities take charge of the employing of enforcement officers in order they have the relevant experience and training in order to fulfil their role to the best of their ability. And, Presiding Officer, on these benches, we will support the bill at stage 3. Amendments at stage 2 have been instrumental in providing clarity on a wide range of issues. And across the Chamber, many members raised concerns over enforcement officers, event zones and the use of reasonable force. And I believe the weaker parts of the bill, which many touched on in stage 1, have now been improved and strengthened to ensure that we can support it in its final stage. We know that the passage of the bill will bring much opportunity to people and businesses in Glasgow and the wider area through this brilliant sporting event. And UEFA Euro 2020 has the potential to deliver more jobs, to encourage increased tourism and promote the best of Scotland. And on these benches, we want to harness the energy of this major event to ensure there is some sort of legacy and positive impact left behind, which I'm sure we will talk about again in the future. The Euro 2020 Championships will not, well, we hope it will be a huge success if we bring everyone along in the process. Communities near Hampden and central Glasgow are counting on the City Council and the Scottish Government to ensure that everything is in place so the operation is slick and efficient, and we cannot let them down. And I thank them for being so supportive in the evidence process in this bill. Once again, I hope the UEFA Euro 2020 Championships are an absolute roaring success, and it will be fantastic to see Glasgow buzzing with a lively atmosphere like the one we saw back in 2014 in the Commonwealth Games. And at decision time, once again, I reiterate the Scottish Conservatives will support this bill at stage 3. Thank you.
I now call Claire Baker. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am pleased to be opening the debate for Labour this afternoon. The committee has given careful consideration to the legislation, and this afternoon we can expect parliamentary support for this necessary piece of legislation to enable UEFA Championship to include Glasgow as a host city. It is a significant achievement for Glasgow to be included as one of the 12 host cities. 2020 is the 60th year of the European Championship, and to recognise this landmark, the Championship will take place across Europe. The success of the Commonwealth Games proved that Scotland could host a modern, inclusive tournament. We provided good infrastructure, a friendly welcome, top-class facilities, and a sporting spectacle that provided many special moments. Since the Commonwealth Games, Glasgow's hosted the World Gymnastics Championships, the European Championships and the European Short Course Swimming Championships. The city has rightly earned a reputation as a fantastic host for major events and has been officially recognised as one of the top global sporting cities. Securing these type of events takes partnership work. As with the Commonwealth Games, securing host city status for UEFA Championship needed close relationships between government, local government and other key stakeholders. During evidence, there were concerns from some local residents, representatives, and the partnership approach must include them and clear information provided to them as the event unravels and proceeds. For these type of events, we need to demonstrate ambition, leadership and vision, and Scotland's increasing confidence in the field is helping to secure our position as a competitive location. There is increasingly a desire from organisers to expand venues and opportunities, and we are well placed to take advantage of that. And sport has the capacity to bring people together. The UEFA Championship is one of the world's largest sporting events. As well as those who attend the matches, millions will be watching on televisions across the globe, and this will provide positive exposure for Glasgow and Scotland. There will be economic benefit for the accommodation and hospitality sectors, and we must do all we can to persuade people to extend their stay in Scotland and provide a positive experience which would encourage them to return in the future. Although there are parallels with the Commonwealth Games, including the legislation we're expected to agree today, the Games were a different proposition, and there was a more substantial cultural involvement and volunteer opportunities. But now that the mechanisms of this event will all be in place, consideration should be given to how we can celebrate the UEFA Championships and include it in Scotland's cultural calendar. I am pleased to see that throughout the tournament, Glasgow will host a UEFA festival with 31 days of free festivities celebrating arts, culture and music, in addition to football and other sport. From the beginning of the tournament on Friday the 12th of June, George Square is set to become the main fan zone in the city, with an additional fan zone in Merchant City on the Hampden match days. Visitors to the fan zones can watch matches on giant screens while enjoying local food and drink and live music and other entertainment. The Football Village will also offer tasted activities such as walking football and mini kickers, encouraging visitors to come and try the sport whatever their age. As well as a number of paid opportunities, there will also be Host City volunteer team made up of some 600 volunteers who will have a key role to play in providing information, helping fans move around and giving a warm Scottish welcome to all those who are visiting the city. While Glasgow is a host city, we should also be thinking about the opportunities we can create for visitors to extend trips beyond the tournament itself and beyond the city to the rest of Scotland. With the UK about to leave the European Union, we are reducing our political involvement and at risk of weakening our economic and social relationships. International events which bring people together through sport are important for fostering cooperation and understanding and recognise our continuing place in Europe. Our participation in European cultural and social structures are important in the future, and our hosting of matches in Glasgow and in London, with the final due to take place in Wembley, has the potential to be symbolically important and demonstrate that they are still part of the European family. Before hearing MSP's contributions, I'll briefly comment on the ticket touting measures. Ticket touting is a practice that must be stamped out. It is unfair on fans, it exploits their passion, and rather than offer events at a consistent price, it inflates prices to make an additional profit, which neither fans, performers or organisers benefit from. While we support any effort to address ticket touting as part of this championship, it is a problem that is more widespread, affecting other sporting and music events, with resellers too often being able to take advantage of fans who are seeking tickets. And clarity from the Minister and from the Scottish Government in closing on the possibility of a framework bill that he referred to at committee and how devolved powers would enable this would be welcome in the closing contributions. I look forward to the rest of the debate. Thank you.
I now call Ross Greer. 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's good to see the UEFA bill finalised in a form that works for everyone. Hosting matches for the Championship next year has the potential to bring some really significant benefits to communities in Glasgow and across Scotland. It's vital the legislation enabling those matches to take place does so in a manner which is fair and proportionate to those communities. I'm mindful that UEFA want to protect the sponsorship deals that they've secured, and there are a number of very large corporations that stand to make a significant amount of money out of this event. That means restricting other businesses already operating in event areas. These are largely local and small businesses, people who are rooted in our communities. We obviously all hope that many of these local businesses will also benefit, but that won't be the case for all, and we should always be hesitant before restricting the operation of small businesses for the benefit of a few large ones. But this is a condition that comes with hosting UEFA matches. Profit for multinational brands is not what football is about, but football, as well as being a sport, is now inevitably an industry, and big businesses is a significant part of that. But this is also about people enjoying these games, watching top teams perform and hopefully being motivated to get out and play themselves, and we shouldn't lose sight of that opportunity. We just have to bear in mind that government and this Parliament exist to stand up for our communities, including where their interests go up against the profit-seeking of large corporate players. When this bill was first introduced, it didn't quite stand up for our communities, though. Not only that, in some cases it went further than even UEFA would have asked for in its efforts to protect corporate sponsors. The bill originally sought to grant extensive police-like powers to local authority officials who are not police officers, powers designed to prioritise the protection of corporate profit without due regard to the rights of people or local businesses. But those issues have now largely been addressed, and I commend the Government and the Minister for listening to and working with the Culture Committee and individual MSPs to address our concerns with the first draft of this bill. The vast majority of issues that were raised by myself and others were agreed in advance of Stage 2 and addressed by Government amendments lodged by the Minister. As an example, we've introduced measures to protect individuals against personal searches and searches of their electronic devices by enforcement officers. To be clear, the police already have the powers and set procedures with safeguards in place to do this when they suspect that a crime has been committed. The potential expansion of these powers to council officials for trading and advertising offences would have been an unnecessary violation of privacy rights. And whilst I accept it wasn't the Government's intention to do this, the ambiguity was concerning enough to merit the explicit exclusion of these powers. We also introduced measures to restrict the authorisation of the use of force to police officers only. Again, police already exist here, powers already exist here for the police. They're also trained to a higher standard and have far clearer lines of public accountability than council staff. The original intention of this bill to allow council officials to authorise the use of force was both a step too far and unnecessary, given it was in situations where a police officer would be present. If a police officer is present, it should be they, as the most qualified individual involved, who makes any decisions required about the use of force. This is again the kind of power which Parliament should only be willing to extend sparingly and with appropriate safeguards. Provisions have also been introduced to ensure that powers granted to council officials to search premises are based on consent, the consent of whoever owns or manages that premises. Again, this was the Government's intention, but the case was successfully made by committee members that an implicit intention was insufficient, and it must be made explicitly clear on the face of the bill. We've also clarified there must be exemptions for public protest on the face of the bill. And additional safeguards have been introduced when council officials call upon other private individuals, such as locksmiths, to assist them. A stricter test will be applied whether or not that's appropriate. The police will have to be notified in advance, though of course what further action they take is an operational decision for them to make. Even on the condensed timescale, which meant Parliament took limited evidence on this bill, the benefits of scrutiny by MSPs is clear. We've agreed changes that protect people and local businesses from excessive interference and introduce safeguards on the powers given to officials. We've ensured that civil liberties of individuals and communities are protected. This is exactly the kind of effective work that our committee system was designed for. And I'm pleased the Parliament and Government have been able to resolve these concerns almost entirely by consensus, leaving us with a bill that we can all be content with, and one that the Greens will certainly be happy to support this afternoon.
I call Mike Rumbles also for 4 minutes, please.
When the committee examined the bill at stage 1, it was quite obvious to all the members, I think, that it did need to be amended. It just wasn't exactly in the right place. In particular, I was concerned about the powers in the bill as set out originally, which gave some pretty extensive legal powers to council enforcement officers to enter and search premises. In section 19, it had said that an enforcement officer could, without warrant, enter any place except a house and may search it where the officer believed a championship offence had been committed, past tense. This power, if agreed to, if it wasn't amended, would have been in excess of what a police constable has available to him or her in these specific circumstances. The police constable must always apply for a warrant to search premises. During the stage 1 evidence sessions with the Minister, he was at pains to stress that sections 18, 19 and 20 should be read together, where it implied that this power was not what it seemed. However, in response, I was also at pains to say that legislation should not be about implying anything, but it should be absolutely clear what was and was not allowed. There were other issues too, which other members have also highlighted. However, when we got to stage 2, I was pleased to see the Minister had indeed responded to these issues that the members of the committee were making, and he made the required changes to the bill, so I thank him for that. There is only one issue which, in my view, was not very well addressed by the Minister, so slight criticism, which was the issue of explicitly exempting UEFA by name of the ban on ticket touting. We have a situation where, in evidence given to the committee by UEFA, they made it absolutely clear that as organisers of the tournament, they had no intention whatsoever of ticket touting. In fact, how can the issuers of tickets be guilty of ticket touting? They can't be, by definition. Yet in banning ticket touting for this tournament, the Scottish Government was exempting them from this activity in this bill. I'm not convinced that the reasons given by the Government for not accepting my amendment to this at stage 2 are understandable. I still don't understand them now. It cannot be good practice to outlaw an activity and then give UEFA a specific example in the bill from it. But I decided not to bring back my amendment here at stage 3, because in particular, if I couldn't persuade Claire Baker to support it, it was unlikely to pass here at stage 3 anyway. So I'm a realist. However, I would urge the Scottish Government to bring forward a new bill, and the Minister hinted at this, to completely outlaw the practice of ticket touting, and this time to apply it universally. Deputy Presiding Officer, this is a good bill, where for the most part, for almost everything, the Minister in charge of the bill has listened to the evidence and changed the bill accordingly, and I commend him for that. This is a good example of a committee of this Parliament doing its job to improve government legislation. And isn't it good that the Minister just didn't try to steamroller this through, but as I say, he listened and acted accordingly. I wish that this approach taken by the Minister would be emulated by other ministers. Maybe I'm going to get him into trouble, who bring forward government legislation. I'm thinking, of course, of the next stage 3 debate on Thursday afternoon here in this chamber, the referendum bill. I don't hold out much hope of Mike Russell doing what Ben McPherson has done with this bill. So well done, Minister. We now have a bill we can all support. Thank you.
We now move on to the open debate. And speeches of 4 minutes, please. John McAlpine, followed by Brian Whittle.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Glasgow has become one of the world's top cities for major sporting events, hosting the 2014 Commonwealth Games, as well as being a defining moment for Scotland and the city of Glasgow, was an enormous economic success too. It's estimated to have added up to £740 million in gross terms to the Scottish economy. The 2007 UEFA Cup final at Hampden, just one game, resulted in an estimated gross expenditure of more than £16.3 million. UEFA's European Championship, which is celebrating its 60th anniversary next year, will add to Glasgow's reputation as an international host city. It will attract 200,000 visitors, and no doubt many of them will take the opportunity to enjoy other parts of our beautiful country. The Culture, Tourism, Europe and External Affairs Committee report at Stage 1 supported the bill in principle and welcomed the opportunity that the championships bring to the whole of Scotland. To date, 5 countries are using primary legislation to meet UEFA's requirements for hosting 2020 matches, while other jurisdictions are using secondary legislation. It should have been clear at an early stage that Scotland would have been one of these 5 countries, as similar requirements were required for the Commonwealth Games. The legislation for the 2014 Commonwealth Games seemed to sail through Parliament. So it's quite baffling that the organisers did not anticipate the need for 2020 legislation far sooner, given that these matches were awarded back in 2014. There was perhaps an assumption that because the legislation had not received particular scrutiny or indeed challenged the last time, that it would be dealt with as a formality this time. However, the committee took the decision to have a call for evidence and to take oral evidence as well. And I personally believe that all legislation coming before this Parliament should be properly scrutinised, even if it appears uncontroversial. I think the committee learned rather a lot during the accelerated scrutiny process. We're now all familiar with terms such as ambush advertising, for example, which can be banners near venues or handing out free branded merchandise such as T-shirts to spectators that will then be on television and beamed around the world. That immediately causes a problem for sponsoring businesses who have paid significant sums to secure the exclusive right to promote themselves and their goods and services associated with the event. That's why this bill was necessary. Similarly, we needed the bill to protect fans, as others have said, from exploitation by ticket touts. This nefarious practice is no longer something that simply happens in alleys near the venues. It happens on the digital highway and the internet, and it needs sophisticated and robust policing. We heard in committee that our current laws in Scotland are not considered robust enough by UEFA to give adequate protection to fans from ticket touting. So that's the other reason why this bill was very necessary. However, committee members were keen that this did not restrict citizens of Glasgow from going about their businesses lawfully or participating fully in the celebrations. So as a result of our scrutiny, we were able to ensure that there was more clarity with regards to the charity auctioning of tickets, for example, as there was originally a concern that they could be caught up and end up on the wrong side of the law. So I thank the Minister for clarifying that matter. Secondly, there was concern that the apparent restrictions on entertainment in the controlled zones could impact on the many talented young people who busk on the streets of Glasgow. Coincidentally, we were considering this as the BBC Scotland were making Street Symphony with Emily Sandé, which was looking for Scotland's best buskers. As Emily Sandé said, buskers bring such colour and joy to our streets. They don't get the credit they deserve, but cities would be great places without them. So I'm pleased that as a result of the concerns highlighted by the committee in our evidence sessions, that the colour and joy provided by young Glaswegian performers will add to the atmosphere of this major event next year. Thank you.
Call Brian Whittle to be followed by James Kelly.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to speak again on this bill as this bill returns to clear its final legislative hurdle. While the various amendments to this bill are considerably fewer and less controversial than those tabled for other bills, this Parliament has scrutinised. That does not diminish the importance of the bill. 2020 will now see Glasgow hosting one of the world's most significant football tournaments, as well as the COP 2020 Climate Conference. Now, while these events are very different, Deputy Presiding Officer, in their aims and ambitions, both have the potential to deliver real benefits to Glasgow and to Scotland as a whole. Hosting Euro 2020 can only serve to bolster Glasgow's growing reputation as a top-tier venue for sporting events. In recent years, the city has seen a steady stream of major national and international championships, and I, for one, am quite excited to see what the future could bring. And I want to draw the Chamber's attention specifically to a full indoor athletics programme in 2020 at the Emirates, including the UK 3A's Championships. I have to say, slightly jealous, Deputy Presiding Officer, because I never ever got the opportunity to participate like that in front of a home crowd. But I would recommend the Emirates as a venue for international athletics to anybody here who is excited by that kind of sport. Can I say that excuse me, as the UK and Ireland work together on a bid to host the 2030 World Cup, Euro 2020 is an important opportunity to showcase the contribution that Glasgow can make to such a bid. And I would suggest perhaps that in making that, there's quite a lot of things that perhaps we could learn out the back of that. During the Stage 2 debate, it was clear that the need for legislation had to be balanced against the impact on communities affected by the event, particularly with regard to enforcement powers and street trading. I welcome the amendments Ben Macpherson has submitted to improve the drafting of the bill and deliver greater clarity around the application of enforcement powers and the use of force. Of course, ultimately, I would hope that there should be little or no need to use these powers. Indeed, I would actually be interested to know, following the event, whether it would be possible to see whether and how the various powers in the bill were applied. Again, I think a good learning opportunity going forward for other potential events. I also want to briefly touch again on the need for public engagement and awareness ahead of the event. It's hugely important that those affected by the championships and its associated event zones are fully informed ahead of the event taking place and are able to obtain support and advice quickly and easily should issues arise. Now, I would ask the Minister, perhaps in closing, whether they'll be able to provide some detail of what public engagement is planned as part of their closing statement. It will not be a surprise to members to hear that I welcome any opportunity to speak about sport in this chamber, not just because it's something that I pertain to know a little bit about, but because of the differences sport can make to people's lives. Sadly, in Scotland, discussions on football often tend to centre around the blight of sectarianism and the damaging effect it has on individuals and communities. But football at its best can bring people together in a way that few other sports can. And I think the passion and the energy of the crowd at Hampden can do everything from be the basis of a lifelong friendships with fellow supporters to be the inspiration that drives a young fan to train and become our next footballing superstar. So Euro 2020 is a major opportunity to show the best of what Glasgow and Scotland has to offer. And as my colleague has said, we will be supporting the bill at decision time. And I look forward to some more world-class sport in Scotland and hope that there is a long-term impact on the health of our nation and that enthuses our people to take part in activity going forward. Deputy Presiding Officer.
James Kelly, followed by Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to be speaking in support of the passage of this bill, which is an essential part of supporting the infrastructure around the UEFA 2020 Championships. The Championships in Glasgow represent a major opportunity for the city and also for the country to hold and to showcase such a premier sporting event. It comes on the back of the successful 2014 Commonwealth Games and also the 2018 European Championships. The Minister's correct to point out that it's clearly essential that you have proper legislation in place to support the regulation of these championships. The main points in the bill look at ticket counting, enforcement and street trading. And I think the Minister, through the passage of the legislation, has got the balance in all these provisions correct. I think we all abhor the practice of ticket touting. People enjoy not just sporting events, but pop concerts and other sort of large public events. And there's nothing worse than people who trade outside these venues, play on the emotions of people who want to get to these large-scale events and try and get them to pay over the odds. It's a totally unacceptable practice. And I'm glad that Scotland are playing their part in supporting UEFA and making clear that such practices are totally unacceptable, and ticket touts will be routed out and will be brought to justice accordingly. I think in terms of it's been interesting. I'm not a committee member. I've only followed this. I spoke in the Stage 1 debate, and then I've spoken in the Stage 3 debate. But it's been interesting to follow the progress of the legislation. There was concerns, particularly around enforcement, raised at Stage 1. And I'm glad to see that the Minister, working with individual MSPs and also the committee, has been able to resolve those issues. I know that particularly around the Mount Florida and Hampden area, there were concerns about how the provisions of this legislation would potentially be enforced and the impact it would have on businesses and also individuals. And I think the agreement that any any actions have got to be enforced along with a police officer present has given some significant reassurance. And I think there's also a balance been brought in terms of, trading and not infringing too much on businesses. So all that is welcome, and the passage of the legislation tonight can allow us to look forward to the championships next year. The Minister, in opening, regaled us with some of his great sporting memories. We'll have to say, I don't think he was alive at the time of the 1960 European Cup final. Real Madrid, Eintracht Frankfurt, but I'm sure he's watched all the goals on YouTube. I myself, I first visited Hampden for a football match in April 1972, where Celtic defeated Kilmarnock 3-1 in a Scottish Cup semi-final. And with a bit of symmetry, my last visit to the stadium was last month, where Scotland defeated Kazakhstan 3-1. So in between times, I've had a lot of great memories, with family and friends at that stadium. And I'm sure everyone agrees that come next year, let's hope we can see some fantastic events, some great matches, and let's hope that Scotland are part of it.
The last of the open debate contributions is from Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm pleased to have been called to speak in the Stage 3 debate this afternoon on the UEFA European Championship Scotland Bill. And as a member of the lead committee responsible for scrutinising the bill, that is the Culture, Tourism, Europe and External Affairs Committee, I would wish at the outset to thank the committee's excellent clerks. They were indeed of enormous help in ensuring that the committee could in fact discharge its responsibility, notwithstanding the accelerated timescale within which the committee had to carry out its work. As we have heard, the bill is necessary to ensure that the appropriate framework is in place for Glasgow to join the 11 other European cities which are to host Euro 2020 matches. The key provisions of the bill deal with, firstly, the prohibition of ticket touting. As we have heard, this is essential to ensure that as many fans as possible can go to the matches. And in that regard, it is indeed to be welcomed that the Minister accepted the case for an express exemption for the charity auction of tickets. Secondly, the bill is intended to protect the commercial interests of the sponsors by preventing so-called, as we've heard, ambush marketing. To that end, there is provided for a prohibition on unauthorised street trading and unauthorised advertising within the 3 event zones when they are in operation, and these are, as the Minister said, Hampden Park, the Merchant City and George Square. And the Minister, I believe, is also to be commended for recognising the importance of buskers and charity collectors being able to continue to go about their business, and that is an excellent result for both and will add to the life of the day-to-day Glasgow goings-on. Finally, the bill sets forth various provisions concerning the enforcement of the other provisions I've just mentioned, and indeed it was this part of the bill that led to the greater part of the debate at stages 1 and 2. There was indeed a concern that the powers as drafted were potentially too wide, and again I am pleased to note that the Minister listened to the concerns and responded positively in this regard. Presiding Officer, this bill will pave the way for Glasgow to host yet another major sporting event and puts it well and truly on the map as one of the world's top cities for sporting events. The Euro 2020 matches to be played at Hampden are expected to attract an estimated 200,000 plus visitors to the city. And this will, of course, not just be good for sport in Glasgow, but will also be great news for shops, for hotels, for restaurants and for bars, and will also add hugely to the cultural life of the city. And of course, I would say, in conclusion, Presiding Officer, that the icing on the cake for the Tartan Army supporters in my constituency of Cowdenbeath, and indeed Tartan Army supporters right across Scotland, would be if Scotland were firstly to beat Israel on the 26th of March playoff, and then win the next playoff final on the 31st of March. For surely, Presiding Officer, we must always dream big. Thank you very much.
We move to the closing speeches, and I call Claire Baker for around 4 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to thank members for contributing, all those who worked on the bill and those who provided evidence to the committee. Joan McAlpine provided a helpful reprise of the bill's passage and reminded us of the challenges faced by the committee in such a short timescale for scrutiny and the degree of frustration that this couldn't have been avoided. Brian Whittle made a good point about evaluation of the legislation after the event. This is an issue that was raised during scrutiny of the bill, and a bit more knowledge of how similar legislation had worked during the Commonwealth Games would have been helpful, I think, in our consideration of this piece of legislation. UEFA is often open to some criticism as an organisation, and football at this level is a serious business. Ross Greer spoke about the impact on small businesses and the reality of the corporate interest of UEFA in this kind of tournament. In terms of commercial rights and the impact on existing businesses, trading and advertising restrictions are part and parcel of major sponsored events like Euro 2020. And we heard at the committee that the vast majority of UEFA's income comes from broadcasting and commercial rights. And part of this is signing major sponsorship deals, which then need protected. And they made the argument that sponsorship reduces the need for public funding. The bill brings in offences on trading and advertising, which exist to protect UEFA-approved vendors and sponsors during the hours of operation of events. And the bill sets out how this will be regulated and enforced. As Annabel Ewing said, over 200,000 visitors are expected to come to Glasgow during the tournament, with local shops, bars, restaurants and businesses all set to benefit. The vast majority of businesses in Glasgow will be able to operate as normal during the championship, and they should benefit from the influx of visitors to the city. But critical to all businesses will be the timely provision of information, including on when restrictions will apply and any alternative arrangements for affected businesses. Awareness raising will then be key to allowing both businesses and individuals time to prepare and to adjust practices if required. In terms of enforcement, the bill again draws on arrangements regarding the Commonwealth Games, including the use of staff who had acted as enforcement officers during the Games, who should hopefully bring a degree of experience to this tournament. So back to ticket touting, and while offences regarding trading and advertising will apply only in event zones, the ticket offence introduced will be applicable across Scotland, and in terms of electronic sales, even outside of the country. The UEFA Championship should be a demonstration of sporting excellence and fair play. There are many challenges in football. The incidences of racist behaviour must be dealt with. It must be clear that it's unacceptable and a strong response is needed to this. That includes from UEFA during this tournament if any kind of incidents. And it needs to be made clear in advance of the tournament that that kind of behaviour will not be accepted. Also, the recent announcement that Russia is excluded from international competition for 4 years, although they can participate in this championship, brings performance-enhancing drugs into the discussion about fairness in football. But football, whether it is grassroots clubs or international tournaments, is a game which needs to protect its reputation of fair play. As James Kelly said, ticket touting has no place in the world of sport, and the bill sets out that it is an offence and that there are consequences. Access to the sought-after matches must be fair, and I hope the legislation will be effective in achieving this aim. I say hope because the amount of profit to be gained from ticket touting means it remains an unscrupulous business, and so there needs to be a public awareness campaign, and UEFA have an important role to play in making their policy clear. Fans who buy tickets which have been resold could find that they are not valid, and this needs to be clear. And I welcome the Minister's opening statement that regulations are being introduced earlier, which I hope will raise awareness of the consequences of ticket touting. Presiding Officer, I mentioned volunteers in opening. During the Commonwealth Games, the Big Lottery Scotland introduced the Volunteers Support Pot. That was to provide resources to allow equal access to volunteering, and I wondered if any consideration had been given to whether there's a need for this, as 600 volunteers are expected to be recruited. I would want to make sure that everybody who was interested in it was able to participate in that. So while events like the Commonwealth Games have showed us that any anticipation of legacy in terms of increased physical activity across the country should be tempered, I think there's a degree of disappointment in how or a recognition of how challenging it is to increase physical activity linked to major events. I think there's much more work could be done there. There are still benefits in this regard, and as far as possible we should encourage current fans, the young and others new to the sport, to not just watch the matches but to participate as well. I hope we will see events across Scotland which seek to encourage this, and I'm sure we'd all love to see, years from now, a national team which was inspired by this championship having taken place in Glasgow. Thank you.
Paul Alexander-Stewart for up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm very pleased to be able to close today for the Scottish Conservatives on Stage 3 of the European Championship Scotland Bill. As we've already heard, the bill is intended to address those areas of Scots law which currently do not meet UEFA standards on protecting commercial interests with reference to the sponsors. The bill raised some concerns when it came to European Convention on Human Rights. The concerns with reference to street trading and advertising could inhibit businesses, and that we felt was a real difficulty, while powers granted to enforcement officers to enable the search of private property could inhibit individual rights. The possible impact on business enjoying their trading will take place across the 3 event zones, and these event zones are in Hampden Park itself, George Square and the Merchant City Zone. Now, these are large parts of the city of Glasgow, so it's very important that the bill does safeguard the relations and the enforcement officers with regard to entering some of these properties. This can occur when we have an occupier and the enforcement officer is accompanied by a police officer, or as we heard earlier, the sheriff has also supported that. So today we've heard some very strong and some very committed members of Parliament giving their views on where we stand. And the Minister himself talked about the milestone for this. And I think that's right. There's a real milestone on this legislation and working together. And as a member of the committee, I certainly benefited from having these meetings and having that discussion. And I thank the Minister for that interaction, because I do believe that did help in the process. The events itself will make sure that there is a positive impact and the reputation of Glasgow and Scotland will be enhanced. And I think that's vital vitally important. My colleague Rachel Hamilton spoke about the real advantages to the culture and to the tourism sector within Glasgow and across the city, and talks about the event zones themselves, ensuring that businesses did have the opportunity to enhance their reputation and get that opportunity. We also touched on ticket touting and the laws and the difficulties that has indicated and caused. But the main issue is jobs and opportunity. These are there to ensure that individuals and organisations get the chance to develop that. And that could be a real success. We saw that success in the Commonwealth Games, and that's very important. Claire Baker touched on the success of the Commonwealth Games, and I think it's right to do so because that brought together and gave us a chance, and that gave us a platform when we were looking at this bill to where we should be looking. And the whole approach towards the cooperation that took place between the Glasgow City Council and the business community was touched on many times, and through the conversations that we had, Presiding Officer, and the individuals who gave us evidence were able to enhance and give us that opportunity of what they wanted to see. Ross Gear spoke about the fair and proportionate, and I think that's very right, that we should be looking at to ensure that individuals and organisations are given that fair and proportionate support, because businesses need that, and it's the small business that we want to ensure that is protected in this whole environment, and that came through very loud and clear from our negotiations and discussions that we took forward at that time. So, as I say, working together has ensured that there has been a real opportunity. So, Presiding Officer, the Scottish Conservatives will support the bill at stage 3. Our main areas of concern within the bill were initially when we were looking at the ticket touting and the enforcement officers, but they have been broadly dealt with in some of the amendments that we've taken forward. Subsequently, we welcomed those amendments which provided further clarity. And as I said earlier, the Minister did liaise and consult with us and other individuals and organisations to ensure that these amendments did come through. And they stated that in all of that, it was there to protect and to ensure, because what we want out of this is to welcome additional organisations and individuals, and by having these amendments that ensured that ticking touting and that was taken, and the restrictions that UEFA had. So throughout the whole discussion with UEFA, there was positive feedback and praise for the Scottish Government in its determination that primary legislation would be necessary to meet the requirements of hosting games in 2020 Championship. And as I've said, as a member of the committee myself, I pay tribute to many individuals, organisations who gave us evidence and who were able to participate and give us information about what would happen and what they wanted to see. So demand for tickets will exceed supply, and the aim of the bill is to provide a deterrent for anyone who would seek to make an illegal profit from the resale of tickets. These championships, Presiding Officer, will once again be a showcase for Scotland at its best. It will provide locals and visitors with the chance to participate, and this will enhance Glasgow and Scotland's reputation as a venue and a country full of opportunity that gives individuals the chance to develop and expand. So I'm delighted to close, and I thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Stewart, and I call on Ben McPherson to wind up our debate.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and many thanks to all members for their contributions this afternoon. Clearly, there is consensus across the Chamber in recognising the significant opportunity of hosting Euro 2020 and what that will bring to Glasgow and Scotland as a whole. There has also been consensus from the introduction of the bill that none of us want to see match tickets sold at inflated prices, and the provisions on ticket touting will help to deter and ensure action can be taken where it happens. The provisions on street trading and advertising have also been generally supported, which is very welcome. And as I alluded to at the start of this debate, while there has been less agreement about the original provisions on enforcement, I think together we've worked well, and I would like to acknowledge again the constructive nature in which members have engaged with me, and we've engaged together to improve these provisions throughout the parliamentary process. A number of points were raised by different members, and the first one, I think, which was evident in the contributions, was the significant benefit that having these football matches in Scotland in June and July next year will have. And also the fan zones. The festival that will be created that Claire Baker mentioned in George Square and the Merchant City, and the fact that these fan zones will not only bring extra economic activity for local businesses, but will help encourage young people and others to take up football and to engage in the spirit of the tournament as a whole. There will be benefits to small and medium-sized enterprises across Glasgow, and there will be a wider effect as well. Rachel Hamilton mentioned the effect on tourism as a whole, as well as the local economy, and I think she made an important point in that as well. I thought Brian Whittle was right to talk about the effect that the tournament and the football matches could have on inspiring the next generation, on the social benefits, and the fact that it could also have a benefit on public health and individual health too, and we need to think about that as well as learn for future events too, which was a point well made. And I think that the overall points that were made by both Joan McAlpine and Annabel Ewing about the benefits from having 200,000 visitors, but also that will have an impact on the opportunities for buskers and for charities, thanks to the amendments that have been made throughout the parliamentary process. There was some discussion in the debate, as there was throughout the parliamentary process, around proportionality, and I'm really glad to hear the consensus across the chamber that in terms of the enforcement powers, that we got that right in the end. I think much of that was about clarity and improving the drafting, and to have done that together, I think, has been a very positive process, and I think we now undoubtedly have a better piece of legislation than there was at the beginning, and also than there was in 2008. So I'm grateful for the engagement that we had together on that. Another point that was raised by a number of speakers was on engagement, including from Rachel Hamilton. And I would just state that the Get Ready Glasgow website is now up and running and carries information about Euro 2020, including the draft map of the Hampden Park zone, for example. My officials recently spoke at a broader Euro 2020 event with Hampden Park residents, and will look to raise awareness about the ticket touting, street trading and advertising provisions at similar events in the future. And we've also liaised directly with Mount Florida Community Council that James Kelly mentioned, as well as Rachel Hamilton. And of course, the bill also requires Glasgow City Council to publish guidance on the street trading and advertising restrictions, which will help businesses and the public to understand these, and we will continue to look out for opportunities to engage with the public along with other partner organisations. We have spoken to a range of stakeholders already, and over 2,300 local residents and businesses within the Hampden Park area have been invited to attend information sessions, and we are also being proactive on social media, and that will continue as well. The other point that was raised by a number of speakers, including Claire Baker, was regards to the potential for introducing a framework bill, which was something we discussed at stage 2, a framework bill for major events in the future. As I've said before, the Scottish Government will evaluate this bill, if it indeed passes today, in due course, before any consideration of a future framework bill might be appropriate. And work is underway to ensure that appropriate information is collected during the event to allow this to happen. And this will involve a number of organisations, including Glasgow City Council, Police Scotland, the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, and we are also considering how best to involve businesses and football fans in collecting that information. And we would expect to consider the implications of this carefully before making any decision. We also need to consider the broader issue of ticket touting at other events with regard to considerations around devolved and reserved powers. So we strongly oppose ticket touting. However, in considering if a future framework bill, including ticket touting, could be progressed, the Scottish Government will need to consider carefully the interaction with reserved powers, including on consumer protection. But I look forward to how we engage on those points as we reflect on this legislation, and I think the committee was right. A number of members were right to raise this as something that we can see as a positive outcome as we consider the legislation after this particular event. Mike Rumbles, very briefly, because I'm about to come to
Mike Rumbles.
If we abolish, make ticket outing illegal in this bill, surely we can, and in devolved powers, make it illegal generally.
Minister.
There's a complicated balance between the specific application of this to this event and the general considerations around consumer protection for a range of events, and if a framework bill was to be effective. And I think that is something that we want to consider as an outcome of this bill. So we want to see this bill succeed, and then that will help us inform our thinking as we go forward. In terms of the point Mike Rumbles made briefly around the exemption for UEFA, I don't want to go through the arguments that we had at stage 2, but I'm grateful for the debate that we did have on that point, because I think in considering how we go forward and the potential framework bill, that will be a useful dialogue that we've had in a future debate on that. Presiding Officer, in conclusion, as we move towards laying the regulations in early 2020 and the publication of guidance, I would like to again assure members that we will continue to engage and raise awareness about the provisions in the bill. We have been working with event partners and others to engage with those who are affected, and will continue to do this after the regulations are in place to ensure that the restrictions are understood. In closing, I again would like to thank all members, officials and clerks for their input, and to members for their contributions. Hampden Park has been home to Scotland international matches since 1906, and it still holds the European record for an international football match attendance in 1937. I therefore think it is fitting that it will be a fantastic home for European football again next summer, with Glasgow City Centre providing also an epicentre for broader celebration of football and of the Championship. The Scottish Government has welcomed scrutiny of the bill, and I am confident that together we have produced a piece of legislation that is fit for purpose and allows Scotland to once again deliver the gold standard for major events. By passing this bill, Parliament will help to ensure this happens, and I commend the UEFA European Championship Scotland bill to Parliament and ask members to pass it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. That concludes our debate. If no member objects, I'm minded to accept a motion without notice to move forward decision time to now. Could I invite the Minister, Graham Day, to move such a motion?
Moved, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. So the question is that decision time be moved forward to now. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. And there's only one decision at question time, and that is that motion 20221, in the name of Ben McPherson, on the UEFA Championship Scotland Bill at Stage 3 be agreed. And because this is legislation, we'll move to a vote, so members may cast their votes now. The result of the vote on motion 20221 in the name of Ben McPherson is yes, 110. There were no votes against, there were no abstentions. The motion is agreed and the UEFA European Championship Scotland Bill is passed. Thank you. That concludes decision time. We're going to move shortly to members' business in the name of Alec Rowley on a menu for changes report found wanting. But we'll just take a few seconds pause while members and ministers change seats.